Meeting of the advisory committee to order, and this meeting is being held remotely as an alternative means of public access pursuant to an order issued by the governor of Massachusetts dated March 12, 2020, suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law. You are hereby advised that this meeting and all communications during this meeting may be recorded by the town of Hingham in accordance with the open meeting law. If any participant wishes to record this meeting, please notify the chair at the start of the meeting in accordance with Mass General Laws, Chapter 30A, Section 20F, so that the chair may inform all other participants of said recording. And this meeting, as with all of our advisory committee meetings this year, is being recorded at the request of the advisory committee, and the meeting recordings are available on the HCAM YouTube channel. So is there anyone other than the advisory committee itself that is recording this meeting? If so, please provide your name and address and let me know. I'm not seeing anyone. I will assume that no other recordings are being made. The second item on our agenda is questions from the public on items not on the agenda. Is there any member of the public that is present that would like to make a question, pose a question or make a comment on something that is not on the agenda? If so, use the raise hand function or otherwise identify yourself so that we can address your question. I don't see any hands raised either virtually or actually, so I assume there are no comments or questions. So that brings us to warrant article hearings. And the first one we are hearing is Article Z, repair and reconstruction of Town Pier Wharf. I will say that we will not be hearing Article W tonight, as the answer to our question last week is still being resolved. So without further ado, Bill Reardon, welcome, and welcome to members of your committee, and please proceed.
So good evening, Bob, and thank you for the welcome. My name is Bill Reardon. The address is 9 Steamboat Lane. I'm the chair of the Harbor Development Committee and have been since 2014. I need Bob to call my meeting to order. I did file a notice of meeting with the town clerk, and I see that we have a majority here. So I'll introduce Marco Bohr, Deirdre Anderson, Paul Gannon. Let me see, who else do we have? Ken Corson is an ex officio member of the committee. And of course, I'm here myself. So we are 4 of 7, and we are now in session. So
I assume you want to adopt the same Zoom statement that I read.
I assumed I was covered by that Zoom statement already. But yes, I do wish to adopt that very same statement. It was so expertly done. Thank you.
I've had lots of practice.
I bet. Twice a week for the last couple of weeks. So through our liaison, our principal liaison, Libby Claypool, I had forwarded a slide deck, which I'm going to, ask to have screen share capability and walk you through tonight. The intent was just to put some of this material in your hands so that if you had any time prior to the meeting to get familiar with some of what we were going to be covering, you would have that opportunity, and I hope you did so. So Bob or Sue, can you open me to screen sharing?
You got it, Bill.
All right. All right. So you should all have a
I'm seeing your first slide.
Okay, very good. So let me explain that what I hope to do in the time here is to walk the advisory committee through what has been an extended process to get us to this point, and have you have an appreciation for, the level of detail and the level of interest from the Harbor Development Committee over an extended period of time. I know that in the advisory committee, there are certainly at least 4 new members who were not there last year, and some whose memories of what was an update session in February or early March of last year may seem pretty dated. So I'm going to assume that people are not current, and I'm going to walk you through a bit cold here. This is intended to be a quick run through these slides, and then I want to bring everybody current and get to the ultimate ask. So just as a reminder here, this is an image of the downtown and the Boston and Hingham Harbor area that we've used for some time. I just want to orient everybody. It's familiar to most of you, but the key issues here is we have our new bathhouse and snack shack brought forward this year, completed construction by the Bathing Beach trustees. This is the parking lot for the boat ramp, and I'm pleased to report that I understand that the boat ramp, which is controlled by the state, is targeted for reconstruction starting the beginning of this fall, subject to funding and the capital budget, which will be firmed up in the May timeframe. This is so-called Iron Horse Park or Town Pier, and that is the principal subject for tonight. But just to remind you, the other town-owned wharves are here underneath this is Whitney Wharf, and then this is Barnes Wharf here, where my little hand is going, and that's where the Hingham Maritime Center operates. And this last wharf, which is not in our sites at this time, is Steamboat Wharf, which is probably the most deteriorated, but is the least susceptible to flooding that endangers the rest of the town. So with that, the other one we might talk a little bit about is this area right here, which is we refer to as Veterans Park, because the memorial for the Vietnam veterans was there. It's actually now been moved to Whitney Wharf, but that area is another town-owned wharf that we, over time, will be proposing to do work for. So a bit of a chronology, and you'll see that this ends in 2020, as Libby pointed out to me this afternoon, and I'm going to carry that forward in remarks later. I'm not going to walk through all of this. I just want you to have a sense of the span of time. Some of you know about the Kleinfelder study that was done in 2015. That was risk assessment, adapting to climate change concerns about increasing tides and storm surge and so forth. That led Harbor Development to gather data, with our consulting firm, Beals and Thomas, topographic, bathymetric. We did a visual assessment of all of the wharves. This was with funding provided at 2015's annual town meeting and again in 2017. In 17, based on that data gathering, we selected Town Pier, Barnes Wharf, and Veterans Park as the priorities. As I mentioned, we set Steamboat Wharf aside because it's not, it doesn't contribute to our concerns over flooding in the case of higher tides. We consciously made a decision to aim for a 2030 timeframe. To carry somewhat beyond that, you'll see in a minute that we have some information from Kleinfelder that goes out to 2070, but the more that you project out over time, these tide assessments, the more uncertain we are. So we, as a conscious decision, concluded that we should be aiming for the near to midterm. In 2018, we chose the elevation height that we wanted to target for the harbor wharves, and I'll explain why we chose 11 feet. To explain, 11 feet NAVD is sort of a universal engineering terms, we might all be familiar looking at tide calendars with 16.2 feet above mean low water. That's what your home tide calendar shows. So we presented alternatives in 18. The Board of Selectmen looked at those alternatives. We were focusing on the height, the construction materials, and the cost. And those were the principal factors that were initially approved by the Selectmen in 2018. That brought us on to doing designs and permitting, initial plannings for permitting. Again, working with Beals and Thomas. Late in a year and a little over a year ago, we made presentations to the Selectmen and indicated that we had decided to home in on Town Pier first, both as sort of a guinea pig, if you will, a straw man, knowing that we were going to be going through a number of different permitting bodies, and we wanted to see how that would go. That led us to about this time a year ago. In this time frame, we did not have an engineer, a chief engineer in the town. You'll recall that J.R. Fry, our new town engineer, joined us in the late February, early March timeframe. So some questions were raised at the selectmen's level that gave rise to some concerns, and we had a revised cost estimate that was up pretty significantly. That caused us in March of 2020, roughly a year ago, to conclude jointly with the selectmen that it was not appropriate to proceed with the article at that time. So we pulled the article that was drafted and ready to go last spring. So as I said, I will update that after some of these other slides. Why are we doing this? Well, this is the worst storm that we've ever encountered in Hingham. This is March of 2018, so-called Nor'easter Riley. That's Town Pier, under about 2.5 feet of water. You see the wooden structure here at the end is actually the tide is kind of right up to that level. A slightly different view is this one, which shows a car that was there, and it gives you a sense of how far up behind Red Eye Roasters that the water actually came. And this subsequent slide shows you what the aftermath looked like looking out toward the harbor. This is all a riffraff, coming in. So, this is the concern as it relates to Town Pier, but it's wider than Town Pier. The Kleinfelder study, which I'm going to show you next, is just the summary page, was looking at potential for sea level rise and storm surge over longer periods. They chose two timeframes, 2030, 2070. The objective of this study, you'll recall, was to help the town focus on, well, where are there valuable town assets that we need to protect, and in our planning, design around. So things like the pump station in Station Street, things like Foster School, which, believe it or not, is in the flood zone and is an area of concern. This section, of course, down North Street is an area where there's a lot of businesses and so forth. So this was an important step here. The next slide is one of the slides that Kleinfelder showed. This is a simulation. It's simply saying, in 2030, with a 1% kind of 1 in 100 year kind of storm, what might flooding look like, as we're looking out from the fruit center toward Stars and toward Red Eye Roasters right here. And not to scare everybody, but there was a similar simulation for 2070. As I said, this is projecting way out, but it simply indicates we could have, as every community on Boston Harbor could have, serious issues that will cause us to think very hard about what we in the long term do with the harbor. Given all of that, our job, as I described in that chronology, was to think through what did we want to do? What was appropriate for the town piers, town wharves that were of particular interest and concern to us? One of the exercises that we went through was to sort of say, well, look, let's take a look around the harbor and see what are the elevations above, and I'm using NAVD rather than mean low water, because that's the kind of unified engineering base. And you'll notice that here is Whitney Wharf. And you'll note that the height of Whitney Wharf, which you may remember was rebuilt with CPC funding in 2003. And the elevation there is 11.1 feet NAVD. You remember that we also redid the area at the front of the parking lot at the bathing beach. And there are concrete blocks, interlocking concrete blocks underneath the sand dune. And that's at an elevation of 10.6 feet. Here is Town Pier, elevation 7.2 feet. It gives you a sense of how low Town Pier and Veterans Park is the same. The mobile station is actually lower. And here, this one is Barnes Wharf, where Hingham Maritime is located. So, the concern here is that all of these are low, and we all are in time going to have to deal with all of them. But our principal focus, as I mentioned, we chose Town Pier first, in part because it's the principal, most used town asset on the harbor front. Is, as Ken Corson frequently reminds us, it is the only public location where a citizen can bring in their own boat and have access, parking in the parking lot, and go out in their boat. Every other access in Hingham is private. It's either a marina or it's the yacht club over at Crow Point. So, this is an important asset for the town for that reason. This is also where a number of activities along the shore, when we've had touch a boat or anything like that, Town Pier has been the primary focus. So our goal in looking at this and thinking about elevation was to come up with what we thought was a practical and sensible recommendation that would deal with safety, because the problem is that these wharves are deteriorating. And we know that from looking at Steamboat Wharf, which is badly coming apart. We also were looking at cost, and we were thinking very hard about aesthetics. And by aesthetics, I mean that, the history of these wharves, the fact that they, were built out of stone in the 18th century, and they are part of the iconic look of downtown. As it happens for Town Pier as well, it is in it's a National Historic District that includes North Street. So Town Pier is actually in the National Historic District, and we need to deal with the kind of historic aspects of Town Pier as well. What I want to do with the next slide is to give you a visual of what we're really about here. And these pictures were taken 3 weeks ago. And the intent is to show you, this is the front of Town Pier. You saw that earlier picture of Town Pier, totally covered over by water. This is sort of a normal high tide. I think this tide, for those of you who are boaters, is about a 10-foot tide. Hingham tides vary, normal. Forget about a king tide, so-called. Normal tides vary from roughly 8 feet to maybe 12 feet. This is a 10-foot tide, on a kind of normal day without a lot of chop. And you see that we have about one course of stone that is, there's freeboard for about one course of stone. This is right at high tide. Now I want to flip you to a different view, which is to look over to Whitney Wharf, which, as I said, was reconstructed in 2003 and raised to the level of 11 feet NAVD. You see that here is roughly 4 stones worth, or roughly 4 feet over the freeboard that was available at Town Pier. So our real focus here is creating a situation at Town Pier that would protect in the same way that Whitney Wharf protects. In the 2018 storm, Nor'easter Riley, there was water kind of right up to the edge, but Whitney Wharf was not overtopped. And that's, that's the extreme, that's the worst storm since the blizzard of '78. So that's just to give you that sense. Some other things you need to understand about the uniqueness of what we're dealing with. This is the FEMA flood map, and we have an unusual situation. Here is Town Pier right here. It's mislabeled, I think, in their chart. And this is reference to the velocity zones in the harbor. And this is a function of how much wind will build up and where the wind tends to come from and what kind of waves can arise. And you'll notice that Town Pier actually is bifurcated by two different velocity zones, one at 12 feet and one at 14 feet. And that's simply a function of when we have nor'easters, which is where a lot of our winter storms come from, they're kind of coming from World's End, and you have the fetch of waves coming across the harbor toward Town Pier and toward this area. So we had to be conscious of that. The next slide simply sort of shows you in greater detail that same issue. So here is the west side of Town Pier. This is the east side of Town Pier, and the velocity zones are different for FEMA purposes for each of those. Why does that matter? This is a slice, if you will, of Town Pier, the west side and the east side, laying out against some of the standards, the high water mark currently and a suggested high water mark, but also relates you interestingly to what's the level of Otis Street, which is Route 3A. I told you that our recommendation is going to be for constructing Town Pier, reconstructing it to a height of 11 feet NAVD with what we're referring to as modularity for another 1.5 feet. Well, by that, I simply mean we build the foundation strong enough so that if we wanted to, at a later time, add another course of stone, another 1.5 feet, we would be able to do that with the existing substructure and foundation that we would have built. So what this is sort of showing is, here's Otis Street. And you'll notice that Otis Street, which is Route 3A, is pretty much at 11 feet. It didn't seem to make a lot of sense to us at this time to be thinking about trying to build a wall on Town Pier or any of the other wharves that would be a great deal higher than Route 3A itself. Two reasons for that. One is kind of the aesthetic of Fortress Hingham. If you came into Town Pier and you added, 6 or 7 feet rather than 4 feet, you're really looking at an imposing, fortress-like entrance to Hingham Harbor and to Hingham's waterfront. So we were trying not to do that. This next slide, I just wanted to give you to sort of show you the thought process that we as a committee went through at some length with Beals and Thomas and with the then town engineer, Roger. What we were doing here was consciously making some decisions in terms of, look, given our projections of what elevations we could expect water with waves or without in 2017 and in 2030, and what height should we be targeting our wall? This was an example closest to the one that we ended up, which, as I mentioned, is 11 feet. This was targeting 10 feet too. If you go to 11 feet with modularity to 12.5, what we were doing is looking at the probability of having overtopping of Town Pier at various, in various situations. So this one, for example, is saying the 1 in 100-year storm, if we were at 12.5 feet, for a period of time with still water, we would be overtopped by a little more than a foot. And with waves, we'd be overtopped perhaps considerably more, but only at the high tide and only for a relatively short span of time. So, it was this dynamic that really led our extended conversations back in the 2017, 18, 19 timeframe to come to our recommendation of 11 feet with modularity to 12 and a half. So look, with all of that said, what are we talking about building here? The next slide shows you the design that is currently the one we are working with. I want to just point out a couple of things here. I mentioned that this is the design of the new boat ramp, which the state tells us is in line, capital permitting, to be constructed starting in the fall of 2021. You'll notice that there'll be a new flotation system, so boaters will be able to put their boat in, tie up to the float, move their car so that another boater can come in, and so forth. This section here you'll recognize is some of what is a small beach now. That's a beach that frankly our harbor master is not very happy with, because it's a very dangerous beach because there are boaters coming back and forth right in front here. It's fine for kids in the sand, but not a very good spot really for beach going, especially when to the other side of the boat ramp there's an extended beach with lots of sand. So this is to be built up with armor stone, similar to the armor stone that is in front of the old bathhouse over at the baby beach. This reflects the wall at 14 feet. This dotted line is the cofferdam that would have to be installed. It's one of the very biggest pieces of our cost, because we need to take the existing wall down. To do that, you have to, it's called dewatering the area around the wharf itself, and then build the foundation, and then build the wall back up to the desired height. A couple other things I'll point out. This design moves right now, you know, this parking along here, along the edge, and actually on the other side as well. This plan would move all of that parking and have it be right here in angled parking with a one-way street going through, much safer for pedestrians, and creates more park space out here. Some of you know that one of the goals of the Harbor Development Committee has been to continue what we've referred to as the Harbor Walk. It's kind of modeled after the Boston Harbor Walk. Right now, it goes across the green at the bathing beach, in front of the bathing beach, and then in front of the gazebo. We want to continue that across the boat ramp parking lot and pick it up right here and have it continue around the edge of the wharf, and then come over to the walkway that brings you over to Whitney Wharf. I will explain that one of the things that happens is to raise this wall 4 feet, we will have to do some fill in behind. It will mean that the Iron Horse will not have quite as big a hill, but we will leave what I'll call a reveal of about a foot or foot and a half, so that people pushing a baby carriage or riding a bicycle along the brick walkway could not simply go off the stone and into the harbor, which they could do today, although it's a pretty rough pathway today. So this is just to give you a sense. I think I've covered the major things. I guess the only other thing that I would add is we know full well, as I mentioned, that there will still be times when this, even adding almost 4 feet, at some storms, this will be overtopped. So we have to allow for drainage, and the design accomplishes that. So once the tide changes after the worst, foot or foot and a half, hour or hour and a half at the top of the tide, the harbor seawater will drain back out. So the last slide I want to share with you, and this is very small print, and I don't expect you to read it, but I'm going to describe in a minute what we've done since last March when we pulled the article, and the work that we've done with our new town and chief engineer, J.R. Fry. J.R. worked with us through the summer, and it was only through his work that we did conclude that we were going to remain with our recommendation from last spring. And we wanted his support to be satisfied that this was the best thing for the town. So I'm going to just read this one section here at the end that says, for these reasons outlined above, the engineering division recommends a strategy for achieving coastal resilience by constructing existing seawalls up to the proposed 11 feet in ABD design elevation, and a future construction of a landward barrier along Route 3A, the corridor, to provide additional protection along the harborfront up to an elevation of 15 feet NABD. This strategy provides the best value for the town's investment in harbor resiliency while addressing the basic risk of coastal flooding. What his statement, JR's statement, and I think will be on the call here with us, is emphasizing is that we fully understand that even if we did all three of the town-owned wharves, there are still holes along the harbor front. And I'm going to go back to this. We know that if we own this pier and this pier and this pier, this pier, that, Red Eye Roasters has a wall. John Kenny at his Hingham Harbor Arena has a wall. The Rotary wall, I think I'm recalling that the elevation there is about 9.5 feet. All of these are potential sources of flooding that we will have to deal with over time. Harbor Development's conclusion was we weren't going to try to address all of that now. We would think in terms of a sort of two-phased step-back approach where at the harbor's edge, at the wall edge, we would come up to a height that would significantly improve our current situation and begin toward the strategy that may be necessary in 2040 or 2050. So with that, I'm going to stop the share so that I can see all of your faces, and I'm going to continue with just the follow-on. I mentioned that the chronology needed to be updated, so I'm going to do that now. Starting last March, we kind of stepped back. We had some conflicting information from an outside engineering firm that the Board of Selectmen had retained. We needed to really understand that better. And we did. We met over the course of the summer. We had 4 separate meetings all summer with JR. And we ended up, confirming what I've referred to as the risk-based recommendation that we had made a year ago. But we realized and want to emphasize, I think probably in speaking about this to town meeting and even to you and the selectmen previously, we maybe have made too much of saying, this is the answer to flooding along the harbor. It's not the long-term answer. It's part of the answer. It's a phased time-adjusted process. So our interim step, the objective here is we want to preserve an important asset, historic asset of the town and current use asset of the town. We need to improve the safety. It's really coming apart, significantly deteriorating. It's not something that I would want to walk a grandchild around right now because literally they could, fall and it's 10 feet down at low tide. We want the harbor walk to be a possibility for this key asset of the town, and we wouldn't do that unless we rebuilt it. And we want it to be consistent with the other elevations in the town at this time, because that seems to make sense. So bring us more current. I carried you through the summer and into the fall. We were working with the Board of Selectmen Liaison, Joe Fisher, who I will say honestly came to the table slowly. Joe is in part the one who had some major concerns last March. And over time, he has come, I think, to appreciate the compromise that the Harbor Development Committee is recommending here. It's not the solution forever, but it is an important solution for now. However, in the fall, a new element arose, and that was some conversations that we had with our conservation agent, Lonnie Fournier. Many of you know her and the work that she does with the Conservation Commission. Lonnie had been aware that we were working on these. She attended some of the meetings back in 2017 and 18, but she hadn't had extended conversations with her commissioners. And she wanted us to know that Conservation Commission has some concerns and some reservations about elevations of existing structures along the harbor. They have some regulations of their own in place that are a challenge to any additional elevation. And they have some philosophical concerns in terms of, should we be looking at softer solutions? And would this structure as proposed create any potential harm for adjacent structures, whether private or public? So the concern would be if you have waves that are hitting a vertical wall in this location, would they be diverted and do damage, for example, to Red Eye Roasters or to Hingham Harbor Marina? So they've raised those. We chose to engage with the Conservation Commission, not in a formal way. We didn't file our notice of intent, which would have been the first step in the permitting process, which typically follows once you've got your full design and you know you're going to try to proceed. So we met with them independently, initially in early December, and then again in early January. They still have some concerns. We've had, I think, a lot of engagement, and we've addressed a number of their issues. But they still would like over the permitting process to have a clear understanding of particularly those issues of, hey, is there any chance that constructing this wall to this design would create negative issues, would create some potential damage? So we have chosen to work with them, and we have engaged a firm. It was a firm actually that was part of the Kleinfelder study. They are the Woods Hole Group, a almost internationally known bathymetric and oceanographic institute. And they have agreed to do modeling of both the existing situation and the design situation, in other words, sort of before and after, that will reflect what happens to tides and to wave action. And does it create the kind of potential concerns that they they're worried about? It took some time to work out exactly what would be responsive for our needs and for Conservation Commission's needs. The contract with Woods Hole Group was signed on February 26th, and their current estimate is that it is going to be 6 to 7 weeks before that work will be finished. That means that we are in this situation. I went to great length to describe this to the Board of Selectmen over the last 2 weeks, where we have a decision to make. You could say, well, look, there's a concern out there that needs to be addressed. Should we have that answer before we proceed further? Or does it make sense to proceed on what I've called a parallel path, sort of a two-path approach here, where on the one hand, we proceed with the Board of Selectmen, with the Advisory Committee, and with town meeting to raise the question, should we approve this wharf and this reconstruction? And appropriate funding, subject to grants, which will reduce that funding, which I'll talk about a little later. Or should we step back? It's pretty clear that, with their work to continue right up to what is now our projected town meeting in early May, that we're not going to have the benefit necessarily of that information prior to a town meeting. But my observation and that of the Harbor Development Committee in deciding to go forward with Article Z was that we don't think the situation is really any different than any other major project that the town might consider that involves a lot of engineering and a lot of permitting. The permitting process will start with conservation, the planning board, the ZBA, the Army Corps of Engineers, the Department of Environmental Management at the state. So this permitting process is going to go on, and it strikes us that it's fairly common that you choose a design. That's the design you would prefer to build for all of the reasons that you've reached that conclusion. But it may, in the course of time and in the course of permitting, change somewhat in response to regulatory requirements. So it seemed to us that that was not such a far cry from the norm of many projects that we might encounter. I think about school projects or the new public safety building as an example. So the emphasis, of course, is that nothing will be spent until such time as permits are received. So there'll be no construction actually that occurs. So I've sort of laid this out in my own mind as, look, there are pros and cons to proceeding here. And to me, the cons are you'd like to have perfect information. You'd like to have Woods Hole's response. You'd like to have all of the permitting done. But realistically, you can't really do that. You'd like, in some ways, to have a full plan for 2070 now. But it's very hard to do that, and it's arguably not cost efficient to do that when you don't know whether the projections of tidal increase are going to continue with today's models or whether they will be different. This climate change situation is very hard to deal with. So, we'd love to have confidence that we could look ahead to all of that. We can't. Realistically, Harbor Development concluded we could not. We're also very mindful that there are a lot of capital projects in town with competing interests. We're not immune to that, and this is a big ask. The number is $5,650,000, which is the estimate from Beals and Thomas that would be necessary to build the wharf that we've designed. So, in summary, I would say, look, the pros are we've deferred this in 2018 because we were going to try. We actually had a warrant article in 2018 for a $200,000 appropriation because there was a potential for a $200,000 partial grant that year from the Seaport Bond Council. We didn't get that. As you know, in 2019 and into 2020, we had the uncertainties at the engineering department, and we really couldn't proceed without our own town engineer. So over this summer, working with JR, we've had the benefit of that. We did defer last year because of cost concerns and some questions which we now feel we have addressed to our satisfaction, and as I'll explain in a minute, to the Board of Selectmen's satisfaction. We're also aware that time is passing here, and with each passing year and more storms, these wharves are weakening. The water gets behind them, the material flows out between the stones, and they start to come apart. We're mindful that in the case of Barnes Wharf, the town has a legal arrangement and a lease that calls for us to get going on that wharf so that the Hingham Maritime Center can make plans for what they hope to have as a new structure on Barnes Wharf. So, deferring further does not seem to be, in the interests of the town from our perspective. There is also the possibility of infrastructure dollars coming from the feds. So our sense is, look, this meets a current need for an important asset, to preserve that asset, have it be safer, have it be aesthetically consistent with what we have. It addresses the near to medium term while we work on the longer term. So we as a committee are recommending to the town that we proceed with this as an initial resiliency step that meets a lot of needs for now. I think you're aware that this was a unanimous vote of the Harbor Development Committee. The Board of Selectmen met over the last 2 weeks, and after a very extended hearing with them, they also voted unanimously. And this evening, as you may or may not know, they are considering a letter that is being prepared for the what's it called, the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs, where there is a grant opportunity for up to $3 million. And it's important that there be letters of support for that. So the selectmen are considering signing such a letter. That application is due this Friday. So other bodies such as the Harbor Development Committee will also be providing letters. So, it seems to me that the parallel path choice makes the most sense, with the emphasis that we won't spend any dollars until we actually have the permitting done. My understanding is that the permitting process is probably 6 to 9 months, and that the likely construction period for this would perhaps be the fall of 2022, not the fall of this coming year. I do want to emphasize, because I know the advisory committee's principle, much of its focus is financial. There are grant opportunities. I mentioned the EOEEA opportunity for up to $3 million. The Municipal Vulnerability Program of the state also has certain money for parts of this effort. The Seaport Bond Council just approved a $1 million grant for the city of Plymouth to rebuild their town wharf. And FEMA also has money available subject to requirements. All of those intermix, and we will have to work our way through the various grant opportunities, but this would be the equivalent of what we did with dredging 2 years ago, where we appropriated the full amount and said that any grants would obviously reduce the ultimate amount that the town would pay out and then would borrow. So that, together with a Washington environment that seems to be interested in building infrastructure. Some of you know that the governor has a climate bill on his desk, passed by both houses of the Massachusetts legislature. And again, it seems to us that to be positioned to have access to that funding, we know you have to have skin in the game. And that's why it makes sense to proceed at this time. So look, that's a long-winded exercise, and I'm sorry, but it's a complicated story, and I wanted to try to have everybody have the full perspective. So at this point, Bob, I'll pass it back to you. You have other members of the committee. I can't see, is JR joined us?
No, JR is not here yet.
I don't see him. Okay, I will try to get a call into him. So if there are questions of him, but other members of our committee are here, and Ken, I see, has joined us. So Bob, back to you.
First of all, I'd like to thank you for a very informative and dense, in the good sense, presentation. And I'd like to thank Libby, who's done an enormous amount of work on this over the years, and ask her as our liaison if there's anything she would like to add at this point.
Yes, thanks, Bob. Couple of things, Bill, is just to clarify for the committee is it accurate that there needs to be town meeting approval in order to apply for certain grants, so that we have to show that we already have an approval of the project, and then we can continue down the path of additional grant approvals?
That's correct. I asked JR that question specifically this afternoon, and as it relates to EEOEA, they clearly are in that situation. It's a little bit like the dredging. You have to appropriate for the full amount, and then that's the indication. Look, that the town is going to do this. This needs to be done. Now we need the state or the Fed's help to get it done.
Yep. So I would just highlight, I think the timeline, if you look at it from our standpoint, is on advisory would be that if it was, if the article was put forth at this town meeting, then we're looking at, say, the 6 to 9 or 12 month permitting process. then potentially the funding could be requested. I guess actually the funding is going to be on this particular warrant article, but then the actual construction wouldn't happen again till the fall of 2022. And I do want to just reiterate the grant opportunities, because there are a lot out there. And I think we have a history, and certainly the town's done a great job with the help of particularly Ken Corson at the with the Harbor Master's Office of getting grants. Then Bill, one other point I just wanted to, that I didn't hear you bring up tonight that may be important for members of the committee is, I know you talked about that at this point, some of the best knowledge we have, at least at this point, is the 2030 levels. I know I've heard in some past meeting over the years that I believe, isn't Boston Harbor also using that as a target themselves as they are doing some work? It's a recollection that I had, but I could be mistaken.
It's interesting, Libby. I let the selectmen know that Boston Harbor, the city of Boston, has a major effort underway, and it's sort of neighborhood by neighborhood. They've gone by district. And I brought that up in part to the Conservation Commission because I wanted them to be aware that Boston is looking at, in some locations, using softer measures, using parks, and using to have softer solutions. But in some cases, they are talking, and the one that all of you will relate to is is it the Haymarket subway location right by the Marriotttown Wharf, which literally the king tide was running down the escalator. And that area is going to be raised to, I think, the tune of 6 or 7 feet, which amazed me. So Libby, I'm not exactly sure the planning effort for the city of Boston. We're all looking at the same most current information we can. One of the things that will come from the Woods Hole group is we will move the needle by about 5 years in terms of more current tidal estimate. And as you know, the issue of climate change doesn't seem to be getting any better. So it may be slightly worse. What I need to emphasize is that because we fully understand that Town Pier, which is the subject of this article, could at certain times still be, overtopped for a short period of time, that does not reduce its value in adding to our resiliency, because as town engineer JR has told us, it will end up taking a lot of the energy out of the wave action that would be coming at Route 3A or going across and into the Station Street parking lot. So, long way of answering your question, Libby. I think they're looking at the same data.
Okay, that's all I have, Bob. So I'll turn it back to you for other members of advisory.
I had a couple of quick questions, Bill. One is
Could I ask for just a second, Marco, do you have JR's phone number?
I do not.
Can I give it to you and ask that you call him while I respond to these other questions?
Sure.
His cell phone is.
Do we want to do that on an open meeting? I'm just trying to be protective of his personal information. You may want to send somebody a note.
I can call him if it's helpful.
Okay.
And would you do that, please? I want to have the advisory committee have full access to everyone who might have information that would be of use to them. So thank you, Ken.
You're welcome.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Bob.
and thanks, Evan. Good point. First question was, at least initially putting grants aside, the source of funding for this is borrowing.
Correct.
Okay. And the second question is.
And Bob, my understanding is generally on a project like this, we build, we use, internal funds, and we tend to bond at the end of the project.
Right.
So in terms of feeding into what I know, I happened to sit in on your Dave Anderson's incredible presentation on the new models that we have available to us. So I think, that can be worked nicely into that model.
Okay. And the second question kind of goes to what you just said. There are costs of with respect to permitting, are there not?
There are. We are still working with money that is left from the appropriations in 2015 and 2017. We have a fair amount of that money left. Sue, I'm remembering $100,000 or so. I'm gauging, Bob, because there's been activity recently, but we currently have money at least for this next year.
Okay, so you think that may cover the permitting?
I don't know whether it will fully cover the permitting because obviously this tail, the permitting tail has gotten longer.
Okay, I'm going to turn it over to other members of the advisory committee for questions. So if folks could use the raise hand function, that would help me. And I will note that we put this on the agenda for Thursday night as well for any needed further discussion or a vote if people wanted a few more days to think about it rather than voting tonight. So folks can start thinking about whether they're ready to vote or whether they want to wait till Thursday. So are there any members of the advisory committee that have questions?
Nobody's raised their hand.
I'm not seeing
Bob,
any.
what I have done is also scheduled a meeting for Thursday for our committee so that we can be responsive and be present for any further questions on Thursday.
Okay, thank you. And I see Victor's hand. So Victor, why don't you go ahead?
Bill, not specific to town pier, but what is your schedule on the other piers? So in other words, we go ahead with the $5.5 million for this project. When are we looking for large costs on the next ones?
Part of, I'll respond to that as best I can, Victor. We don't have a set timetable. At one point, a year or two ago, we had put a bit of a model together that would say, okay, if we line up for this grant making opportunity, when we would be available to go back and ask again. I noticed that the Board of Selectmen's letter, as drafted at least, sort of points out to the state, look, to the extent that you support us in this, then we can proceed, with the others. The thought when we decided to carve out Town Pier, which is probably the most expensive because it is so important to the town, is that the other two, particularly Veterans Park and the mobile station, that is not going to be a stone built up granite like Town Pier or Barnes Wharf. So it's going to be armor stone, equivalent to what's in front of the bathhouse, the old bathhouse. So that one will be considerably less expensive. The thought was perhaps one a year, Victor, but it's going to be a function of what we can do both from a town perspective and as well from the other alternative funders. This started, Victor, 4 years ago when then state representative and state senator spoke to us and said, get ready, be shovel ready. And then when the opportunities to raise money come forward, you'll be able to say, hey, we have the design, we know what we want to do.
Other members with questions? George? George?
So yes, Bill, so what would be the plan for the non-town owned properties? You noticed that you mentioned a marina and I think it's the Red Eye Roaster also, but what would happen with those areas?
Currently, as I mentioned, actually, let me go back. I can tell you that looking back to that same chart that showed the elevations, that Hingham Harbor Marina is up, is just under 9 feet now. So when Tom, I've forgotten his last name, owned that property, he built his wharf up by about 2 feet then. They would be responsible for, making their own improvements to their private property. You know that we have worked pretty closely with Nick Bond at Red Eye Roasters. And when we installed the Whitney Wharf Bridge, we actually added a course of granite stone to give him some more resiliency right at the back of his building, which he uses in part to handle his marina business. But that would be their responsibility. But this is, as I pointed out to the Conservation Commission and to the selectmen, this is almost a societal issue for the town, that we are going to, over time, have to address this, especially if some of these projections for outer years begin to be real. The Kleinfelder report at the beginning in 2015 said, look, you have three opportunities or three alternatives to address sea level rise and storm surge. You can protect, you can mitigate, or you can retreat. I don't think we're into retreating. I view this project as some combination of protection and mitigation. And I think that's what the individual owners of those other properties would need to be doing as well, George.
Okay, but there's no obligation on their part to actually raise those wharfs.
There isn't, but they would face the same issues in terms of potential damage.
Right.
That, for example, John Kenny at Hingham Harbor Marina. I mean, in the winter, he's got his floats out there. He has equipment. He has a building on that wharf. So, over time, he's going to face the same issues.
Right. No, I understand that. It's just an expensive. It would seem to me would be expensive for him to do that, and yet, if not all of the property is at the same level of height, then you have a hole for the water to come through and flood the streets.
It is, though. I will point out to you something that is what we realized in part, and I'm glad to see that JR has joined us. Thank you, JR. Harking back to that chart at the beginning, and I don't know, can I still screen share here? Yes. If you look at this chart, George, you'll notice one of the reasons why we decided we were not going to put all of our eggs in the basket of protecting the edge, the water's edge, is that it's much longer. If you go out Town Pier and across and down, and you do the same thing here, and Hastings, or it's Tom Hastings now, it's John Kenny, and you do the same thing over here, the extent of what you're trying to build up is much greater. If you think about the topography of this area, you'll remember that this section right here is a hill, very steep hill. This is Ship Street coming down. Then you have the low-lying area going through here. You get to the Rotary, as you know, Route 3A is going to be modified. It won't be elevated. But once you hit Summer Street, once again, Summer Street is a hill going up. This is Justice Cushing Way going up. So the shortest distance, if you were to have this sort of two-step approach, and you said, look, the next step is going to have to be something along the edge of 3A. You could do it from right here, or actually probably right about here, right across from Red Eye Roasters, along this stretch to Summer Street. And that's a much shorter distance than doing all the way out and around every one of those piers. So I'm hoping that visually that's helpful in terms of, thinking about what's the next step. And when you do that, now you're all on public property, you're all on town property. So if necessary, in terms of filling in those gaps, we're mindful that might be something that will become a municipal obligation.
All right. Yep. Thank you. That's been helpful.
Any other members of the advisory committee that have questions or comments? I'm not seeing any virtual. Oh, Julie, go ahead.
Thanks. Libby, I wanted to know about your comment, and I've been looking for it. I can't find it. And I was just wondering if you had sent it out, or if it was sent out a while ago.
I didn't send it out before tonight's meeting because I felt as though there was so much substance to be covered tonight, and with new members. I didn't personally feel like people would be able to absorb all this information with the updates for those people that have been on advisory last year, and then to try to vote the same night. I'll leave that to Bob and to the entire committee, but that's why I felt that it'd be good to get it on the agenda for Thursday. So I felt as though if there's been some updates with Woods Hole Group and whatnot, so I waited to send out the comment until after tonight.
Okay, thanks. I just couldn't remember that. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions or comments from members of the advisory committee? Any questions or comments from the Harbor Development Committee or JR that your members that might want to add anything?
JR, I'll just mention that I took your name in vain and I read the last paragraph of your communication of November, where you, helped the committee come to the realization that you believed this was the best, use of the town's dollars to address resiliency. So, but please, if you want to, speak your piece to advisory, please do.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, this is I believe it's a worthy project that advances the town's goals of improving safety and improving resiliency along the waterfront while maintaining access now and into the future for, everyone coming after us. So it is an important project. It is one piece of a layered defense by which we can address climate change, sea level rise, and all of the attendant issues that come with that.
Thanks, JR, and thanks for joining us. Any members of the public that have questions or comments?
Marco has a question.
Marco, go ahead.
So Marco Bohr, 33 Elm Street. I just wanted to add to Bill's comment. We also, as part of the Harbor Development Committee, we looked at perhaps, rebuilding the wharves at the height that they're at now at 7 feet. And one of the conundrums is if you build it below 11 feet, you tend to not be able to qualify for any grants. So at the end of the day, in effect, it's equal or less expensive to build it to 11 feet than to rebuild it as is. So that was my only note.
And I would also point out, Bob, to rebuild, you still have to take it all the way down and build a new foundation. You have to dewater, which is one of the most expensive, you're talking about steel pilings all around the pier. So a large part of your dollars, this is one of the really telling things for Joe Fisher as a selectman, when he understood that, you couldn't just repair in an inexpensive way. So just wanted people to understand that.
I will apologize for my tardiness as well, but the reason that I was late is I was getting a letter from the Board of Selectmen, an endorsement of the project towards a grant application that we're putting in now. Now, obviously, there's no guarantee of award, but it's a grant through the EOEEA, which is part of the governor's office, and it's up to $3 million, which would significantly offset the town's costs were we to receive that award.
I filled them in on that, JR, earlier, and
Okay.
I knew that it was in front of the selectmen tonight. Did they get to that on their agenda?
They did, and they voted to authorize the chair to sign the letter in support.
Thank you.
Thank you. Andy, you had a question or comment?
Hold up your cup, Bob.
You're on mute, Andy.
Andy,
Sorry, thank you. I take it there's no way to have the state as part of its 3A reconstruction plans assist you in this project or in the future thought of that inland retaining wall.
So let me answer that in a little bit of a circuitous way, Andy, but it's important. Judy Sneath had yet another meeting of the 3A task force, which has been working hard on this for several years. Deirdre Anderson on the call has been part of that. Judy was asked the question at their last meeting by a member of the public, with the state, is the state going to address, sea level rise and or storm surge in their, reconstruction plans for Route 3A? And Judy was just, very straight and said, from the state's perspective, this project for Route 3A is a transportation project. It is not a resiliency project. So they do not have any plans. Part of it is very pragmatic. JR has pointed this out to us. So has the engineers for the 3A project, DCI, that if you were to raise and try to create a dike with Route 3A, every point where Route 3A meets another road, you've got a major reconstruction job to bring the elevation of the ongoing roadway, whether it's North Street or Downer Avenue or Otis Street. So it's a very expensive process. So they simply have not elected to try to do that with this project.
My second question, if I may, Bob, is would a letter from the advisory committee similar to the one that the selectmen are sending be of any value?
Is that question to me or to Bob?
Through Bob to you.
I think it's to you, Bill.
JR, our filing is this Friday. Obviously, if we come to a vote that is an affirmative recommendation to town meeting, then it would strike me that you would be in a position to be able to do that. And my sense would be that to have the principal, financial body of the town, namely the advisory committee, speak positively would be beneficial. JR, would you agree?
I would certainly agree. And would
Thank
be
you.
very appreciative of that.
Okay. Any other members of advisory or going once, going twice? Members of the public that have comments or questions? Okay, I don't see any, so I thank you all again. I think that we should wait for Thursday night until we have Libby's comment and a little more thought time to vote this. And Libby, do you think in conjunction with the comment that you could perhaps prepare a draft letter of support that I could sign on behalf of advisory if everyone agrees that I should do so?
Sure.
And you can thank Andy for the extra work.
Thank you, Andy. Yeah, and the draft comment is fairly far along. I just felt as though everyone had a lot to absorb tonight, and I didn't want people to feel that we were trying to rush it. So I think Thursday will be great.
Libby, are you going to fuss up that you could start with something that was there from last year? Because we had drafted a comment. We were that far along a year ago.
I know I did a lot of work on that last year, but there's certainly some tweaking to be done.
Yes, of course. There's new news.
Absolutely.
Great. Well, thank you all. We'll see you Thursday.
Bob, once again, thank you for your attention and for making the kind of window of time available so that we could really discuss this in depth. It needed it. It's a complicated story. I understand that.
It's an important project, and it's obviously an issue that we're going to be seeing for years to come in terms of the other wharfs. So it's good to have a good in-depth knowledge of it. And whoever's doing the grant writing, they should get Ken Corson's secret talisman. And I wish you all success with that.
Thank you, Bob.
Here.
And thank you to all the members of the advisory committee. Harbor Development, we'll see you at our meeting tomorrow evening.
Okay, full week for Harbor Development.
Thank you,
So
Bill.
we will then move along on our agenda. We are not going to hear the or vote on the Waterways Fund transfer issue tonight because issues of how to draft the comment so that we're doing this correctly from here on in still have to be resolved. So when they are, we'll put that on a future agenda. Article L, we actually already heard and voted, and I was about to send it to the town administrator's office when I noticed something. And do you want to bring the AdCom up to date, Andy, or do you want me to just go through it?
Sure, Bob. Susan Murphy, sharp-eyed as she is, pointed out that the recommended motion extended the selectmen's authority to accept easements until April 22nd, I think it was, 2022. And we don't know what the date of the town meeting next year would be. The idea is to extend their authority year to year. So she proposed language that would be extend the authority of the selectmen through the end of the month in which next year's town meeting occurs. So the Article L that I sent around slightly after 6 o'clock tonight contains that change in language.
So basically, last year when we voted this, we voted it before the pandemic struck. We voted it at a time when we had every anticipation that we would follow the normal calendar for town meetings. And so we voted it through the end of April 30th of 2021. So we inadvertently baked in an 8-day period of time when the selectmen weren't authorized to accept easements. So not knowing when the town meeting is going to be in 2022, Susan thought we should change the language to make it so that they had authority until the last day of the month in which the 2022 town meeting was held. And we'd anticipate using that language going forward into the future to cover this kind of situation where we might not always have a town meeting in April. So any questions or comments on that? Victor, did you have a?
You're muted.
Doesn't want to let me speak. All right. This has come up before. I mean, we've talked about the gap. Isn't the simpler solution just to vote to extend the selectmen's authority to the end of the fiscal year? So every year it's to June 30?
I don't know the history of why it was done this way. And I think without knowing the history, I'd be reluctant to venture an answer. It does seem that the language that Susan proposed, and she, after all, is town real estate counsel, should cover the situation from year to year.
Yes, but it's awkward for, I mean, it's not obviously apparent to somebody reading. What are they talking about? I mean, it's sort of a convoluted way of saying it. Yeah. And the selectmen don't accept easements that often anyway, right? So having
Agreed.
a gap, having a gap is not the end of the world.
I thought about whether we should put some ratification language in here, but I said, let them wait a week. Because it's really only an 8-day gap.
Seems like Victor's solution's a little cleaner going forward, but that's just my thought.
I don't know whether there's some other issue with the end of the fiscal year versus just going beyond the town meeting. Well, why don't we reconsult with Susan Murphy and we just won't vote this time? We'll put it on for a later meeting.
Is there any is there any concern, Victor, that you're having one town meeting extending the authority beyond the authority of the town meeting, if you will?
Well, they already do that with the April 30 date, right? I mean,
Yes, that's true. That's true. And the end of the month is the same thing, right? You're right.
It's a question of how much, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, I suppose there could have been, we always have in the comment that this is just for the 1 year. I guess I don't know for sure, but I suppose some town meeting could say, hey, selectmen, we don't want to do this every year. You have this authority forever. I don't know, maybe there's some statutory provision that prevents that, but.
Well, of course, the board is changing all the time. And I don't know. I think we're better off to check with Susan and see what she says and report back. Okay, so Andy, will you do that?
I shall, Bob.
Good, thanks. Anyone else have any questions or observations on this at this point? Okay, let us move on then. That brings us to review and discussion advisory committee policies and procedures. And I will note that Tom Mayo is not going to be with us tonight. So the town administrative budget recommendations are going to be addressed on Thursday night when Tom will be with us, both for those and for the public safety facility discussion. So David Lee, thank you and your committee for all the work you did on this, and thank you for the changes that you have circulated. Do you want to go through them or give us the highlights? And
sure. So just a couple things. First, thanks to Julie and Alan for helping on this. We met and tried to clarify what we had seen as potential issues that came up from year to year, I guess, for Julie and I, and Alan is a new person. One thing I will say is once we discuss it and decide whatever we want to do about approving it, I will go through and edit for grammar and all of those sorts of things, because when you have different people going back and forth, that just didn't get done before sending it out to you. So I think the main things that we did, and I know I've already had some discussion with some of you, in the preamble, we wanted to just clarify that the advisory committee is not just the finance committee, because some towns have just a finance committee. And so there's been some confusion about why are we looking at all of these warrants that have nothing to do with money. So we just wanted to clarify that. We also have attempted to use gender neutral language, which I know is also an issue for some folks. But we have done that. I think in some cases we can make things plural, which might ease people's discomfort with certain pronouns, but that has been we have tried to do that. We obviously did not change Board of Selectmen to Select Board because that's not a change that's happened yet. If that change does happen, then we should do that. In the very first part, we changed the notice requirements to be consistent with our new proposed amendment to the bylaws. So I think that was clear. We've tried to make clear the role of liaisons, and we tried to clarify this issue of subcommittees and when they're official. I don't think we've actually gotten that right yet. But we took language from the handbook about being the open meeting law applying to official subcommittees. So whether we need to define what official means is still, I think, a question. One thing on section 8, we tried to, this has been an issue the last 2 years I've been on, where people at some point raise can I support candidates or not? We talk about issues, we don't talk about candidates. The answer has always been, at least to me, has been, well, I don't do it because I think it's not a good thing for AdCom to be supporting candidates in municipal elections. But, you know, there's nothing that says you can't do it. And of course, we have a history in the last, I guess, 5-6 years maybe, of 2 of the candidates for selectmen were in fact members of advisory. One year, I think when Mary Power ran for selectman, she was chair of advisory, and then a couple of years ago, Eric Haskell ran. So it's kind of hard to say, well, you can't support a candidate, but you could be the candidate. So this has been a question. There's a question of whether we should just leave that quiet and leave it as it was, but we tried to do that. And then the last thing I'll just say, and then we can go through it however people want. What started this all was Bob's question about what is now the new number 11, about whether or not we can in fact submit articles ourselves, because that's what the policy says, and whether or not that was permitted. So what I'll say is there's nothing in the general laws that says we could not do that. And in fact, what it does say is unless you have a town bylaw that says otherwise, the actual budget article comes from the finance or advisory committee. In our case, however, we do have a Hingham general bylaw number 6, I guess, or that says it's the Board of Selectmen that submits the budget. So that was kind of an interesting thing. But the other issue is what Article 6 or Section 6 of the bylaws basically says town boards, departments, or entities can submit articles. And so it seems like we would be restricting ourselves. Like the article that we proposed this time, I think would have been appropriate to have come from us because it's about our procedure or our policy. So I don't know what the way we didn't change it, thinking that why would we take away a power that we seem to have if we ever wanted to use it. But we could decide that we don't want it, so we could change that procedure. I don't know if that made sense. So
I'll offer my comments going backwards from the last one. The guidance I got from John Coughlin about submitting warrant articles was that town boards kind of related to policymaking boards rather than recommending advisory boards such as the AdCom. And we ultimately had our AdCom bylaw inserted by the Board of Selectmen. So, and on the political issue, it's always been my practice not to sign letters, put signs up. Doesn't mean my wife doesn't do it. But I think it probably, with respect to municipal elections, it's the better practice to not be overtly supporting a candidate. You know, I don't know that would relate to discussions or that sort of thing, but it's, and I understand it's an issue that could go either way. On the committee's issue, I thought, based on our discussions earlier this year about the open meeting law, that we were going to change our terminology to perhaps refer to things like the public safety team as a team and a team leader, and perhaps make clear in these policies and procedures that those teams were not deliberating towards a recommendation, a group recommendation, but the team leader was more coordinating the work of the team in the gathering of information. And the last thing I'll say is, and I raised this with you, Dave Elaine, that I wondered about the real need for our policy or procedure about being recorded in opposition. It seems to me at every town meeting that I've attended where there's been a minority position of the AdCom, that somebody says, well, what was the view of the minority? And we might find ourselves in the situation where perhaps no member of the minority asked to be recorded in opposition. And then under our rules and procedures, they wouldn't be able to talk. And so, Victor, you're kind of the dean and historian of the AdCom here. I don't know if you remember a reason that's been expressed for why we have people recorded in opposition.
I don't, Bob. I mean, this was in the rules, the policies, when I came on. I don't know how far back it goes. And it is a little unusual. I think, well, I'm speculating that the reason may be that since once AdCom takes a position, AdCom is supposed to speak as a whole. That's the position. So people who wanted to counter that had to be recorded. And that gave them dispensation to then, present the alternative side. But that's pure speculation. It's never really been explained to me. So I don't know the real answer.
Well, I throw it out there for people's collective thought. Erin, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, so I had sent my comments to Daveline in an email, but I guess I was operating with regards to the town elections. I was operating under the assumption that it was a rule, not a practice, that we don't openly support candidates. I would like to see that be a rule. I think it allows advisory to stick to advisory. I have already been put in multiple awkward situations with this year's town elections, and it seems to happen year over year. So I don't feel strongly, jump up and down strongly about this, in the sense that it will be how I conduct myself either way. However, believing that this was the policy gave me just that much more, shall I say, cover to not feel like I needed to put signs in my yard and go to, 50 coffees during normal years. I think we're a visible board, and people often approach us. And I think that on top of the responsibilities that we have for AdCom can sometimes be counterproductive.
Thanks. Andy?
I support what Erin just said. I think that's wise, and I think it protects us. I can imagine that a lot of people would like to solicit members of the advisory committee to, because of the credential, to support them in writing. The second thing I was going to say is that with regard to the minority view being heard at town meeting, I must say, until Victor and I voted the correct way for the public restroom, while the rest of you chose not to, and to victimize the dignity and health of elders yet again, until that point, I always found it very awkward to hear a minority member of the advisory committee speak at town meeting. I thought what Victor just said was correct, in the sense that once advisory committee takes its vote, then it is the advisory committee that speaks, and it speaks through its recommended motion, and it just struck me always as a little bit awkward for someone on the committee to get up and, in essence, argue against it, with the obvious exception of public bathrooms in Bear Cove Park. But that's my thought. So I don't know quite what the answer is. I mean, I don't want to prohibit, I don't think, people from speaking, but I don't like the practice of someone getting up and saying, well, what was the thought process of the minority? And then the minority gets up and says something, and it could well be that each person who voted against had a different reason, or no reason at all. And the short answer is it really is of no relevance or significance if the minority was unable to persuade other members of the advisory committee to go along with their views. Then I don't really want them to try to persuade town meeting. So that's a little more long-winded than Victor put it, but I don't know. At the end of the day, I guess I don't know if I'm proposing any change or any difference, but it wouldn't break my heart not to hear from minority voters, I guess is what I'm saying.
Julie and then Dave.
I just wanted to agree with Aaron's point about the town elections. And you're right, you can have a spouse who speaks out, or maybe it's whatever. But I think in terms of the being a member of the advisory committee, it's important to try to remain impartial about local elections. So I always practice that. And I, like Aaron said, I kind of always thought it was the rule, and until we started looking at it this year and scrutinizing the language. So I just wanted to vote in support of making it a rule. And then the second thing is for Andy, I know you joke about the Bear Cove Park aside, but I think it's important to explain to town meeting that there was a difference in opinion, and, you know, explaining, well, you know, for illustration purposes, the Bear Cove bathroom, 10 people against, no action, and 4 people really wanted it. And I think there's I think it's important to hear from the minority. And I think in the past, haven't the minority voters kind of conferred with each other and picked the person who would speak? And so it's sort of a streamlined, okay, well, this is kind of what our thinking was. And it's just helpful. That's all.
Dave.
Yeah, just quickly, Joy hit on some of the things I was thinking about. I guess I would agree with Joy, and it's rare, but I will disagree with Andy that I think the minority opinion is critical. I think it's kind of what AdCom's supposed to do when there is a minority opinion. I think that, frankly, the power of AdCom is the infrequency of a minority opinion in terms of our diligence. And I guess to me, that's what heightens kind of the value of the minority opinion, is that if someone was just rubbing their hand across the warrant and sees unanimous votes on 60 of 62 articles, and then 2 articles have a split vote, at least in my mind, my reading of the warrant, those are the ones I start to pay attention to for what it's worth. Secondly, just quickly on the election thing, I guess I'm torn on this. I mean, I too love the ability to avoid some of those events by saying I'm on the advisory committee and I don't have to sign that, whatever it's called, the signatures on it. But I'm curious if people have a different opinion about an election. I guess I'm struggling a little bit to think about how our support of a candidate necessarily maps onto our activities as the advisory committee. I certainly see how it, on a lights on the field, for example, or dogs, or pick one, maybe that's been a little bit more contentious. I can see how an AdCom member's position on a warrant article item would be detrimental to AdCom. That I get. I'm not as clear on a candidate for office. I can be convinced, but part of me likes this language only insofar as it helps someone who really wants to do it, and it might also allow some, I don't know, I'm sorry, I'm not being very clear, other than to say that I think I'm a little bit reticent to stop someone's First Amendment rights with respect to a candidate. But I guess I'm happy to step on their First Amendment rights and squash them into the ground with respect to a position on an article. So someone can explain to me how that's constitutionally sound.
Brenda?
As a longtime participant in town meeting, I've always found hearing the minority opinion helpful. So I think it just sort of makes people look at more sides of an issue if they haven't thought about it deeply themselves beforehand. Although I think I have always assumed that the minority presenter was presenting sort of a summary of the minority view, not just a single person's view.
And Evan?
I would just say that I've only really, I think, been around where I listened to two minority opinions for the AdCom. I do find it helpful. And I think of Tom's, I think it was opposition to the pool, and he had very strong reasons and convictions for doing it. And I think since he had to sit through all the meetings and deliberate on it, I thought I do like the ability for people to do that. And on the non-supporting a candidate, I didn't think of it until Dave said it, but you know, the real rule we have is not to necessarily be an advocate or proponent for anything that we are directly voting on, right, in the kind of course of our deliberations or our budget proposal. So, you know, if somebody really wants to support a candidate, I mean, I actually love that we have this kind of unwritten rule, because then no lawn signs and no, I don't have to sign your thing. But if somebody really wanted to do it, I don't see why we would to be able to kind of obstruct their right to do that just because we have this, you know, historic, you know, non-rule in the rule books.
Erin, back to you.
Yeah, just quickly regarding the election, I think it's important that we all remember that those of us who have served on this board might serve on a board in the future, might serve in a different capacity with someone. And I think that if you publicly go out for, or by the nature of going out for someone, you are in fact going out against someone else. I think that it creates a situation where there could possibly be undue bad blood. I think Dave's point is right, that if you feel super strongly about it, or if it's a member that, you know, you've worked for the last 6 years on AdCom, I mean, I could certainly see circumstances where I would want to and feel very, you know, strongly about that. But I think the downsides outweigh the upside, but that's all.
Victor?
I agree with Erin and the view that it would be a mistake to allow people to support candidates. I think the strength of AdCom in terms of the view that the community has is that we are neutral. And by backing a candidate, you are taking a position in support of whatever positions that candidate has been campaigning on. If, for example, take for example, the water company years. So if there were competing candidates for selectman office those years, some in support of water acquisition, some others opposed. If one of their AdCom members supported somebody on either side, that would automatically be in the tent. That would be a message that, hey, we're, again, whether it's pro or con, whatever the candidate's position is. And I think it just compromises, compromises our neutrality. And I think it would be a mistake to go down that road.
And Julie, back to you.
Thanks. I just want to add that about the issue of not supporting a candidate. I think for me, it's not necessarily something to do with their positions on issues, but it's more like as a member of advisory committee, you work with people who are on elected boards. So you can be a liaison to the planning board, and you're working on, for example, you know, Bob and I work on the forecast group with elected members of the school committee or And so I just think it brings an awkwardness where you're having to work with someone either who you're for or worse against at some point. And I just think that it doesn't help things. I agree with Victor that our strength is our neutrality.
And Dave Lane, and then we'll get back to Dave.
So I just wanted to comment, our current policy doesn't prevent us from working for a candidate or supporting a candidate. Our current policy talks about issues, not candidates. And part of the reason for, I remember that was my first conversation with Donna Smallwood, was about this issue. And I remember her response, which was, our rules don't prevent it, but it's not a good idea. And I thought that, and so for all the reasons that people have said, I think it's actually a really good idea not to support candidates given our role, but that's not what our policy actually says. And so to add a sentence that says it doesn't restrict was to make that part transparent and clear. Part of what I'm hearing, and I'm not adverse if people want to do this, is that there seems to be support that the rule should be we would not take positions on issues or candidates. So I just want to clarify sort of what, this is an attempt to be more transparent about what we do permit. So I just thought it was probably important to clarify that. We may have thought that the rule said you couldn't support candidates, but it talks about issues and not candidates.
Dave, back to you.
Yeah, thanks, Bob. I'm persuaded that you shouldn't support candidates. Thank you guys for that input. And then I would pick up on Dave Lean's point, which I think is spot on. As a former mentor that was asked to talk to somebody about their advocacy on something, I think I think we owe it to a prospective AdCom member to know the rules. And if you are then find yourself in an awkward position after the fact, saying to an AdCom member, you can't support a candidate, and they say, where does it say that? It ought to say it somewhere, so we don't have to have that even more awkward conversation on top of the awkward one that is already present. So I think I would go 180 on my position and say, let's be express about the prohibition. Maybe just add a sentence as to for or against any issue or candidate for municipal office or something to that effect. But I feel like we ought to draw a bright line just so there's no misunderstanding then, if that's the position.
George and then Nancy.
Really, real quick, and not that I'm adding anything other than my voice to the discussion, but I agree with Dave, Aline, and Dave, and Victor, and Aaron, and everybody else who's really speaking for the independence of the board. And I do go in opposition to Andy, I guess, and say I favor that having the minority opinion. I think that's valuable. I think that is very much a part of who we are and what we do. So,
Nancy.
I'm in complete agreement on the people policy. That I do think that it's important that we be able to work with all of the elected officials and all of the people who sit on committees. So I think that having that explicit, I think, is a good idea. On the issues, though, I do think that I think as Dave said, we're the ones that have sat and studied all the issues, and once we have voted, well, I don't know that it's appropriate to stick signs on our lawn. I do think it's appropriate that we are able to talk to citizens that might ask us about questions about why we supported something in a meeting. So, but I think that's only after we have done all of our deliberations and hearings and have come to a vote.
That's kind of the way the rule is written now.
Is it okay? Is it
Yeah.
specific on that?
Yeah.
And I apologize. I only got to see that document today.
And Andy, back to you.
Yeah, I have two quick things. One, I don't want anybody to tell my wife that the rule doesn't apply to spouses, because her judgment and mine on issues and candidates are typically.
You don't want to go that way.
bipolar.
This is a public meeting that's being recorded.
Yeah, but she's not going to listen to it.
You may
I
be
already
going,
sent her the text.
you may be going too far away from the agenda.
Oh, that's a good point, but I've made my point. Now, the second thing is buckle up. Victor and I are going to town on public restrooms in Bear Cove Park.
I just want to respond quickly to Dave's comment about constitutional rights before you did a 180, but nobody checks their constitutional rights at the door. But as a collective body, we can impose the rules that we are going to follow for the good of the function that we want to serve. So maybe the other lawyers will agree with that, but.
So Bob, can I ask, so, because I'm the one who's going to make these edits for us to look at. So would we want to change this to say it's the practice of members of AdCom not to support or endorse candidates, or do we want to make it a rule? The practice is a little softer. I don't care either way. I just want to know what the sense of the board is.
Well, my sense of the discussion tonight was that most people preferred a rule.
Okay, is that?
And I think we may be another discussion and another meeting and a vote away from approving these changes. I would think, Dave Elaine, that having taken what you feel is the sense of the discussion tonight, that you go back and refine the draft amendments. And if you think it's appropriate, propose an option 1 or an option 2 or an option 3 if need be. Then we can have another discussion of those things that have triggered this discussion. And I might ask that, if you went back to somebody like Lucy Hancock or Donna Smallwood and tried to get a sense from them of what this whole recorded vote was designed to address, that might be informative.
Maybe John Asher going back further.
Yeah, or John Asher.
Or even Karen Johnson.
Yep. Yeah, John Asher would be a great person to ask. Okay, Andy, your hand's still up. Are you satisfied?
Yes.
Okay. Any comments from members of the public? I'm not seeing any hands of virtual or waving
So thank you.
frantically
And
on
I
the
will get
screen.
another draft out to people for Thursday's meeting. I know we're already on the agenda.
Thank you, David Lee. And I already said we're not going to do the town administrative budget.
Julie's got a question.
Julie's got a question.
Oh, go
Sorry,
ahead, Julie.
Bob. I just wanted to tack on, and we don't have to talk about it tonight, but at some point I had made some changes to the proposed changes to the advisory handbook, which are the annual changes that sort of talk about what changes we're going to be making for the policies and procedures. So obviously we don't know exactly yet, but I proposed, there's some chart in there that talks about like dates, important dates during the town meeting process that advisory committee goes through. So I proposed making those very general instead of there's specific dates in there. And as we know, a year like this year, that's taught us and last year that sometimes it's not good to be too specific. So anyway, we don't have to talk about it tonight, but I just wanted to, I had sent that out as well.
And let's see where we are. Maybe we'll have some time after the warrant's complete to delve into that, or we may want to defer that to next year when we look at the financial policy as well.
That's fine, but it does include this year's current roster. So by the time, if we make any update to the document this year, we should probably have in this version who was on the advisory committee this year. So.
Yep. Okay, and we come to further discussion of the forecast, financial policy, fund balance, overrides, and debt exclusions. And I think Sue and I are going to try to walk you through the forecast that I sent out about 2 hours before this meeting. And I think I'll try to do something similar to what Tom Mayo did at the forecast group meeting earlier today. I'm not going to ask Sue to actually put up the actual forecast.
Oh, okay.
No, I am going to ask you to put up that sheet you just put up.
Yes, I know. I just didn't know if you wanted it right then and there. I didn't know if you're building up.
The buildup is not going to be long. For those of you who looked at it, you may have seen that a lot happened since the last forecast we reviewed. And the forecast document is now showing a surplus of $274,000 some odd dollars. And so the sheet that Sue just put up that is kind of an explanatory document as to how we got there. And this is driven in part by the requirement that the budget presented to town meeting must legally be balanced. And so similar to the 2009 warrant article that proposed an override, there was a balanced budget presented as part of Article 6, together with discrete budget additions for the override items. So you recall at the last forecast, the shortfall was $4.5 million, rough numbers. And since then, it was determined that there needed to be additional recreation expenses added in. So that brought the shortfall up to the top number in the parentheses, the 4.7 million. Then the town administration determined after study and consultation that the $500,000 that was going to be earmarked for the senior means tested circuit breaker in the first year anyway was only going to cap out at 400,000. So that made an additional $100,000 of overlay available, which reduced the shortfall as set forth. Then it was determined that it was possible to accelerate an ambulance purchase that was on the capital outlay plan for FY22 and bring that expenditure into FY21 by over $400,000. So that brought the number down to the 4.2. Then there was a reduction in by the school committee, the school department, in their level services request of almost $500,000, further reducing the shortfall. And it was determined that the unused non-excluded debt capacity could be brought to zero. So that would reduce that by almost $200,000. So we're down to 3.5. Group insurance, we have got the numbers now, and it looks like that we can cut that by $375,000, bringing us down to 3.1. And we could reduce the legal services additional request by 50,000, bringing us down to a shortfall of $3.1 million, or as Paul Austin asked in the meeting today. So that's the deficit. So there was a lot of work done to get that number down to 3.1. And then in order to present a,
Sorry, this is Dave. Can I just ask you one question and maybe potentially make a comment on what you just covered?
I'd like, if I could, to get through this. So
okay, well, that's okay. Go ahead. I'll come back to it.
Because I think there's more to come that may even answer your question. So then, in order to present a balanced budget, if all the municipal additional requests are removed, that's almost $800,000. That gets us down to 2.3. And if all the educational additional requests are removed, the 2.1 million, that gets us down to 225,802. And if the capital outlay additional request of $500,000 is removed, that gets us to the surplus number of 274,198, from which people could figure out how to add that back in to get to zero. Now, the right side of the screen basically represents the line item municipal requests that are being removed and the line item education requests that are being removed, which comprise the actual deficit and would conceivably form the basis for an override if that's the direction the town decided to go in. Now, if you bear with me for 2 seconds, because in terms of late breaking news, shortly before this meeting began, I got an email from Tom Mayo, and I will read it to you. We heard from Representative Lynch's office today regarding the American Rescue Plan. They are basically saying that while it's too early to know the exact language governing the dispersal of funds, they do anticipate approximately 2.4 million being available to Hingham. It is unclear if this is for municipalities, schools, or both. We've requested more information ASAP, and as we know more about the allowable uses, dispersal rules, timing, etc., we will let you know. So if you take that 2.4 million and assuming that's available to apply to a 3.1 million shortfall, that renders the shortfall $700,000. I was expecting collective cheering at this point. And Sue, anything you want to add to that?
Can you do that one, the last piece, take us from the federal funding? Can you go back the slide a sec? I don't think you didn't get cheering from me because I want to follow it a little closer this time. Thanks.
Well, Sue, could you put your cursor on the 3.1 million? Beside the reduced legal services additional request.
Yep.
That's basically the deficit before removing municipal and educational additional requests and capital outlay. So if instead of removing additional municipal requests or educational additional requests or capital outlay, there's $2.4 million of federal money that hopefully would be available in FY22. That basically reduces the delta to approximately $700,000, which, I mean, if we had another 2 weeks like the 2 weeks that got us to these numbers, you know, we're in a place where maybe it doesn't make any sense to talk about an override period. I mean, we all know what the future looks like and the planning that may be needed for that future. But it would appear that the numbers are becoming far more manageable, far closer to the kind of budget deficits that have been closed in past years in the budget process. So at that point, Sue, anything you want to add?
Yeah, just a couple of points. There are possibly, hopefully by the end of next week, 2 additionals. The town administrator has asked the director of assessing to ask the assessors board to look at releasing excess overlay. We are anticipating and hoping about $200,000. And next week, the Board of Selectmen will be voting on an increase in fees at the transfer station, which will bring in about $150,000. So we will probably, hopefully add another $350,000 to that 274. So if we got that 2.4 and the 600 that ultimately will be the surplus, you're looking at there will be absolutely no shortfall.
I'm sorry if I'm the slowest one here, but does that mean that we've addressed the shortfall, assuming no additional requests on both the municipal side and the school side? Just to be clear, so I understand.
Now, if we get the 2.4, Erin, and the 274 that we have right here, plus the 350 that hopefully will be voted on, everybody will get all this will come back into play, and there will be no override, and everybody will have all their level service plus the additionals.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Dave, back to you about your question.
Thanks, Bob. So my question is on the 490,737 that's referred to as a reduced education level services request. I'm assuming, and maybe I'm wrong, but I'm assuming that $430,000 and $430,060 is the ESSER 2 funding that's shown on the second page. Is that right?
Yes.
Yes.
What's the incremental 60,000?
No, no, they're two separate, Dave. The 490,737 is a reduction to level service request, primarily the reduction of an out-of-district tuition a student moved, and a change in kindergarten enrollment. That was from Dr. Austin's presentation last night.
Oh, good. Okay, sorry. So it just was conveniently around the same value. That's
yes.
Okay, because I just wanted to make sure, because I wasn't clear to me that the ESSER funds would fit into a level services budget. So that helps. Thank you, Sue.
You're welcome.
And thank you, Sue. I knew I'd forget something.
Can I just ask, because it pertains to what Dave just said on the school's budget? Just the numbers that we have in here, do they reflect the new budget numbers that came through yesterday?
Yes, they do.
Okay, but there is some one-time money that's helping them get that reduction, is there not?
The ERISA fund, the 430?
Yeah,
Yeah,
Well, the
They
fund
split-
balance. The
Oh,
fund
yes, and
balance
the
for
fund-
non-recurring costs is still in the budget.
Well, and let's be honest, that 2.4 from the feds that's one time.
exactly. And we all know it. Greg, they're gonna go through advisory first, so he will get to you.
So I think this is spectacular news. I guess I do have a question though, if we've been given any, to someone's point, I apologize whose, but have we given any guidance in terms of out years? I believe the school committee's presentation indicated they thought it would be a 2 or 3 year dig out of any, recovery, for lack of a better word.
I mean, you have the 5-year forecast document, which is still showing shortfalls in 23, 24, 25, and 26. Starting at 1.6 million and going up to 2.4 million. And that's assuming school budget growth at 2%.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, we've again, I don't want to dismiss this as being good news. But if I'm hearing you correctly, we've solved an issue, but partially, in the sense that we've solved it for this year, but we still have a situation moving forward.
I think solved is too strong at this point.
Fair enough.
And there's going to be ongoing talks, Erin, with the forecast group. And that's exactly what we'll be bringing up. What do we do from here?
Okay.
Today at the forecast group meeting, it was indicated we're probably going to have 2 or 3 more forecast group meetings before we actually get to decision day.
Okay.
And, if we make the kind of progress next week that we made last week, things will look good. I mean, we've got a solution on the horizon, but that's where it is. It's on the horizon. And I've got lots of hands raised. So, Julie?
Oh, that's a leftover from before. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay.
Hey, Bob, can I just add one more thing?
Yes, please.
Okay, I gotta go to page 3 here. Because if you see on the right-hand side, the additionals, that's adding 36 FTEs, new employees. So in addition to all of that, we would have to add another approximately $200,000 for benefits. If you're going to have 36 positions, there is mandatory Medicare tax and 36 employees over 20 hours. They have the right to take our health insurance. So I just want to make sure everybody understands that there'll be an additional 200,000 into the deficit or additionals to cover all those new employees. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Sue. Alan McDonald?
Actually, I probably should have put my hand down too, but I had raised the hand to say I wasn't chairing because of this issue of the out years. I mean, while it's terrific to get the year, to get the money in to cover this year, if you take in 36 additional FTEs, you're creating a significant problem to try and fund in the out years. So I'll take my hand down. Sorry.
Kristen?
Yeah, just back to the 2.4 additional money that we could receive. Is that basically similar to CARES Act that we've been going through where, you have to submit the expenses by the end of this year in order to get reimbursed that money? Or is that coming in a different way that we can
Well,
actually?
it's the new legislation that presumably is going to be passed by the House tonight. And we don't really know what the strings are yet.
Yeah. So I know
So, yes,
it's just,
it
it's a
could
lot
be.
to count on, that
Yes.
right at this point.
Yes.
So,
And we're not really counting on it quite yet, Kristen, because we don't know what it can be used for, who can use it, and what the strings are.
right.
It's one path, hopefully, that, if it all does come in, this is how we can use it.
Okay.
Kevin,
So, good news, right, with some of this stuff. I guess through no action of our own, though, right, based on the federal funding. And you tell me, Bob, we have a whole bunch of things on our list for discussion now. We're talking about the forecast. Is it now appropriate to just talk a little bit about, you had mentioned we might not need to do an override. I really, as I look at this, and I had thought about this kind of a lot today and earlier, that I go back to, I think Liza O'Reilly sent a note out in mid-February suggesting a few steps when the gap was much bigger, and kind of levering fund balance as a source, which at first I was a little concerned about. But what I really did like, based on kind of what we're talking about right now, which is the uncertainty around when the federal money hits, what's in it, what it can be used for, kind of further tightening of the budget. And then we keep talking about, we know that there's this structural deficit that is kind of, growing. To Alan's point, you add all these heads, you're creating a problem in the out years. So I think it's great if we can close the gap this year without having to do an override. But and by the way, I would be supportive of doing what we need to do to fund our operational budget. I really do think that as a group, along with the Board of Selectmen and the school committee, we need to take a look and put some sort of working group together, how we close it this year and how we look at it next year. I think we really need to take 12 months to get a good understanding, see how we kind of come out of the pandemic, how the schools are impacted. I think Aaron mentioned, I think Dr. Austin said 2 to 3 years to come out of this. So, if the federal funding wasn't going to come, I still struggle with why wouldn't we take a year, lever kind of what we have in our free cash, right? And really only say that we're allowing ourselves a one-time get out of jail because we're going through, a 100-year pandemic and nobody's ever had to deal with this before. I just feel like we're making it unnecessarily hard for ourselves if we wanted to try to potentially rush to an override when we know that there's going to be some gaps that are created in addition to some of the other structural deficits that have happened kind of in previous years. So I still really think that we ought to pause and be a little bit more thoughtful. There's a schools plan, there's a master plan. There are a number of different plans that can be evaluated, I think, to figure out how we get to right size our operating budget, whether it's this year or the out years. And why wouldn't we give ourselves a little bit of time with the cash we have? And I know we're going to say it's AdCom policy, but I mean, let's be honest. The AdCom policy is our policy. It's 15 appointed people with a policy that, governs, a significant reserve that we put in place for the right reasons. So.
okay, thanks. I'm sure I have much more to come on all those topics. Andy?
I stepped away briefly when apparently the 2.4 million was discussed, so I want to restate some things, make sure I understand them. So there is some information that suggests the recovery bill before the House, back before the House, would provide $2.4 million in educational funding for Hingham. Is that,
It's not earmarked just for education. We don't know how it's earmarked. It's information from Congressman Lynch's office. It's 2.4 million. We don't know the details yet, but that's the information we have.
okay. And the can a town use, or I shouldn't say a town, could Hingham borrow money from fund balance in anticipation of that federal grant?
I don't know the answer to that. I think in general, you can't borrow money to pay for operations.
My quick comment on that would be, having worked at Ways and Means when we financed the Big Dig, you can borrow on grant anticipation notes, but the grant has to be clear. I mean, we borrowed the money ahead of time to pay for the Big Dig because there was already a federal transportation bond bill that said this will be the out-year funding, as opposed to this, which is, there's legislation that says maybe this will happen.
Yeah, and I guess my terminology is quite loose, and I don't mean to borrow as such, but would it be a misuse of fund balance to pay 2.4 million into the operating budget in year one in anticipation of a federal grant later in year one or in year two?
It wouldn't be consonant with the existing financial policy. I'm not sure I'd call it a misuse.
Yeah.
I don't know, Sue, if you have any information on what
Well,
Andy
plus,
is asking about.
Andy, we don't even know what the 2.4 can be used for. And, how, when it can be used. So I don't think we would be able to take it out of fund balance just to put it back in, because we're not sure how we can use it.
Okay. And my
I mean,
final question.
we will get more information rather quickly.
Okay.
Probably within the next week.
All right. And my final question has been talked about and touched on by most people, which is that we're building in a structural deficit. And what's the point of that exercise?
Well, I mean, the structural deficit is going to have to be addressed at some point. There's probably an override that's necessary, at least down the road. It may not be necessary this year, however. And, as our good friend Evan Sheehan said, we need more revenue. And that's got to be addressed. Libby?
Yeah, just a couple of quick things. Is Sue, I did notice that 200 grand, and I was wondering where that was on the first page. So I don't know if that's appropriate, that should go in the additional requests as a educational, or I guess it's not just educational, but new position payroll taxes, because at this point it isn't part of this.
Well, it's under townwide. It's shared. It's a shared expense.
Right, but it's not on page one, correct?
Huh?
It's not on page one though, correct?
No, it's actually for municipalities. Yes, it's not in here. But there's the 784, here's schools, and then on page 3 is townwide.
Okay,
It is
so
the capital and the extra 200,000.
Okay. Okay. And then, I would just reiterate what everyone's saying is that, obviously this is a one-time money we're using to solve a somewhat, whether we want to call it a permanent fix of adding payroll positions. That's just something to, to consider, because to a certain degree, it does kick that structural deficit can down the road. But I would also say, I'm just looking here, one second. I had one other note on. Oh, Evan, it was to mention that, I mean, this budget still does include taking, you know, 2,367,000 from fund balance. So there is still, the town is still using fund balance for some non-recurring expenses. So that is part of, you know, several solutions that are being implemented in order to get to a balanced budget. So I just wanted to point that out, that is still in there. So
Thanks, Libby. I did
and-
know that, but thank you.
And effectively, it's using $404,000 to buy the ambulance out of the fund balance that was contributed to the budget for FY21.
Yeah.
Dave.
Thanks, Bob. Just quickly, I would, second Evan's comments. I think those are right on point. I would, ACES obviously hasn't come up with a recommended number yet. We've got more discussions to have in that regard, but I think, it's not lost on everybody in this group that what the schools are up against in the big picture is something rather extraordinary, and I'm appreciative of, of the approach so far that's been, I think, at least in the big picture, been recognizing that challenge that they face. But having said that, I think Evan's point, can't be underscored enough in terms of the importance of trying to think about what we do in out years, and that solving 22 is a necessary but not sufficient, condition to being happy about what we've done. So I think we just want to find a way to be systematic about looking into the future as best we can, whether it's this group or whether it's a subgroup as was proposed with a recommendation to this group and to the BOS or whatever that looks like. So food for thought.
Thank you, Dave. Julie.
I just want to jump on that, what Dave said and what Evan was saying, that, well, first of all, I'm very happy about this late breaking news. We'll see how it goes. If at all possible, I think that it's important to think about if there's any way we can do longer term planning for fixing of structural deficits that we have, and, having it be an issue to deal with for fiscal year 23. I think that that's better to give us that opportunity to plan. So to the extent that we can balance this year, because there are so many variables about how we're going to come out over the next year. I'm more in favor of just getting through this year and buckling down and working on a longer term plan starting for next year. Thank you.
Alan?
I just wanted to say that I really like the structure. It just went away, but the structure there in terms of how it shows, in terms of moving towards how you balance this year's budget. There it is, but puts the question to the town, or sets it up to put the question to the town for an override of, do you want to buy this? We put before you at town meeting a budget that we have the resources to support, but there are unmet needs. Many feel there are unmet needs. Here are those unmet needs, and here's what we need to fund them. And it just makes it to me is reminiscent of the 2009 question, which is, okay, here's what we have now, but there are these other needs that we've identified. Do you want to buy it? And here's a vision of Hingham. Is everybody in? And because here's what it takes. Here's what we're putting on the table, and here's what it'll take to do it. And just putting a clear, direct question before the town that can be advocated for.
Thanks, Evan.
Oh no, Bob, I was done.
Oh,
sorry, I'll put it down.
Andy.
Does the 5-year forecast simply reflect the left side of this chart that's up now and not the 2.4 potential?
We did not put it in the forecast because we just found out we were getting it. We haven't got it. We don't know what it's for. So no, it's not in the forecast at all.
But the the removing all of the items set forth on the left-hand side is in the forecast, correct?
No, we took these out of the forecast. If you see the forecast, you're gonna see a 274, 198 surplus.
Right.
So all these right here came out.
Right. That's the, yeah, that's what, that's. what I'm
Everything
saying.
up here is in the forecast. Everything down here is not.
Okay. Okay, I guess I don't understand how you get to the 274.
So can I say it a different way?
Sure.
All these changes, Andy, in that amount column on the forecast updates, all those changes have been reflected in the budget,
forecast.
in the forecast. The 3 items below were removed from the forecast to result in the 274 you see in red that's on the forecast. So when the 2.4 gets added back, then some of potentially of those removed requests will get added back to the uses, and the 2.4 will get added into the forecast as a source. Is that any clearer? Is that as clear?
Yeah, I think it is, but is this, does the 3.1, which is the shortfall after reducing legal services, additional requests, right?
Right.
It's the combination of all of them, yes.
Correct. So that, and then how do you get from there to the next number down, 2.3?
A chainsaw.
We we took out all of the town administrator's additional requests
Yeah. And the
out of
same,
Article 6, and
Yep.
the same with educational's additional request, and the
Right.
same with the additional capital additional request.
okay.
And that will leave us with a 274,198 surplus.
Okay, so I don't understand why you're saying that these remove additional requests are not reflected in the forecast.
Oh, well, I'm sorry. Okay, yes, they are.
Oh.
I thought you meant these numbers in the forecast. No, we took
No,
them
no, no,
out.
I'm sorry. Okay, all right,
Okay.
now I get it. Yeah.
Okay,
Okay, I'm not seeing any more hands from advisory. Are there any members of the general
oh,
public?
wait a minute.
Me, sorry.
Tina,
Tina,
Sorry, just quickly. So does that mean for the current out years, the number, on the right side of your page, Sue, is then not currently reflected in the out years budget?
correct.
Thank you. Okay.
It's a forecast, right? Not the budget.
Oh, thanks, Evan.
Yeah.
so if we
It's
end up.
never accurate.
Tomato, tomato.
Yeah.
If we end up spending that 2.4, 3.1, that's what presents your potential pitfall in the following year.
Yes.
But if the federal government's going to give us the money, we're going to take it. I can't see everybody. If people can use the raise the hand function, it's. Is there any other member of the advisory committee that has a question?
I don't see anyone, Bob.
Okay, I hear somebody talking, but. All right, are there any members of the general public that have a question or comment?
Greg Corbett.
Greg, go ahead.
Hi, Greg Corbett, 70 Winter Street. Thank you. So I've been watching simultaneously the selectmen's meeting, and they gave a similar financial forecast update using, I think, partly the same document you're looking at here. And they also mentioned the news that they had also just learned from Congressman Lynch about the American Recovery Act funds. They were, I would say, less optimistic than perhaps you were. There was a lot of discussion at the selectmen's meeting about the structural deficit and the out years, and the Board of Selectmen chairman put up slides showing the out years and discussing in a lot of detail that the one-time funding, whether it's fund balance or money from the America's Recovery Act, is not going to solve that. And so there was discussion about the override. And I know, Chairperson, you said at the beginning of the meeting that this might take the override off the table for this year. And I guess that's where my question goes. Does it take the override off the table for this year, even if we get the money from the America Recovery Act? There was some discussion on the selectmen's meeting tonight that that we should get ahead of the structural deficit. And I guess a question to you and Sue and others, can you move for an override if there's technically not a deficit in the requested budget, or does it necessarily need to wait for a future year? I don't know if that question makes sense. But.
Yes, it does. And someone has actually asked that. An operational override can only be used if you have an operational deficit. You can't ask taxpayers to pay more for future expenses.
And an override can only be put on the ballot by the select.
Correct.
And we're still, even though the clock is ticking towards the end of March, when all of this has to be decided, we're still getting new information daily, if not hourly. We haven't heard what the selectmen have had to say with the town administrator's position on an override. We do have a structural deficit. It needs to be addressed. Now, if you plug in the numbers with the sensitivity tool, you can see deficits in the future years. So we don't have an answer to your question tonight. That's to be determined. Any other members of the public? Oh, let me see.
Bob, I have my hand up.
Evan, do you have your hand up again?
Yeah, I do. So if it takes longer to understand what's going on with the latest federal money, we could conceivably try to, as Liza suggested, solve this, knowing that there's money coming. I'm not playing dumb, but knowing that there's money coming, solve this within ourselves through the use of funds that we have, even though it may be outside policy, and then kind of reconcile that as the money comes in. And Sue, I'm asking you, anything. So say we went and did a instead of using an override, we took the $3.1 million and pulled that from fund balance, knowing that there's going to be money coming in. Anything that comes in would then get returned back to fund balance, would it not?
Technically, yes.
Yes.
Hold on one second. Someone's coming in my door.
How you did it, Evan?
Sticker says hi, everybody. But we have to figure out what the federal money specifically says. I don't know if we can just take that federal money and put it into a miscellaneous revenue and filter it to fund balance. And I think or when we get the federal money, basically put it to whatever budgets we were going to do and then not use the fund balance.
That's my question. That's absolutely my question. So we could vote a budget that says we're going to use fund balance to cover any shortfall while we get our arms in the next year on the structural deficit. And as the money comes in, it doesn't happen all at once, use whatever federal funding for whatever we can to plug those holes. And more likely than not, we would end the year with the 2.4 covering some aspect of a potential 3.1, and have to use much less of fund balance to do that.
I don't think we want to get ahead of ourselves, Evan, until we know the facts.
Bob, we keep saying that, and it's almost the end of March. So I get less comfortable every time we talk.
Alan, have you got your hand up again?
I'm sorry.
No worries.
I guess I'm confused by the statement of we can't do an override without actually having a deficit. Because I mean, I guess my comment earlier was that's what I liked about the structure of that presentation, which was on the left was here's what we have the resources for, but on the right, or whatever becomes of that version on the right, is what the town wants to do, or is putting forward to say, here's a vision, but we don't have the resources to pay for it. Town, do you want to pay for this or not? We can do that, can't we?
Yes, that's a budget override. Yes, that's exactly how we would do it.
Right. Okay. But but still, whether the trick, I guess, is you still can't use any federal funds or fund balance necessarily to actually hire the 36 people or whatever the number is without knowing what those out years. I mean, maybe the federal funds help you with how much you borrow in year one, or goes to support something else that helps out your borrowing. But that's still a 1 year time. That's not going to fix bringing on everything that was on the right side of that. Right. Anyway, my main question was that yes, we can do that. We can say, hey, here's our main budget, but here's what does the town want to buy these other things? And yes, that's great. Thanks.
Okay, I don't see any other hands, virtual or actual. Obviously, there'll be more to come. That will bring us then to review and approval of minutes from March 4th.
I'm sorry, can I say one other thing, Bob?
Sure.
So, because we did have financial policy on the agenda, right?
Yep.
Okay, so the financial policy we keep referring to is the advisory committee's financial policy.
That is a document that we prepare and vote on. And of course, it's a policy that has existed for many, many years.
So it's similar to the question we asked earlier. How did the minority thing come about? So it's one of those self-perpetuating things. My understanding when last time we did the financial policy was that based on 2008, 2009, we revised the financial policy so we could be in a much better free cash position moving forward. So we wouldn't get caught where we were after 2008, 2009.
Financial policy is reviewed and voted on every 3 years.
Right. I know that.
Well, you seem to be saying it was last revised in 2009.
No. We've gone through a financial. No. Coming out of 2008, 2009, in one of those 3-year cycle reviews, the policy was probably adjusted so that we ended up having a much higher, percentage of fund balance than we'd had previously. This is at least what's been described.
I think that certainly that was a time of financial distress. And I think that the town followed basically what it said. Financial advisors were advising it at the time with specific reference to its bond rating. And I think you've seen the Moody's letter that Mary Power circulated concerning the things that can give you a negative outlook on a bond rating.
Yeah, I did see that. Yep. And I think that's great, but I don't necessarily know that a bond rate, a municipal bond rating agency is going to give us a hard time for trying to figure out how to come out of a pandemic like the rest of the world. So I mean, that's all well and good. My point is, it's a financial policy created by the 15 members, or maintained, I guess, not created, maintained by the 15 members of advisory committee. So it is conceivable that when we review next year, again, one of these, we've always done it this way, things, we could put in a clause that allowed us, when faced with an extraordinary circumstance, to, use the policy as we see fit, or modify the policy as we see fit.
We're going to have to give thought to any number of things about the financial policy next year, including, for example, whether TAE should include the water company and the South Shore Country Club. But the water company skews the numbers. Because it makes the denominator bigger by $14 million. We also need to, I think, consider reviewing the financial policy with respect to what to do in a pandemic or a tidal wave or a similar disaster. And in extraordinary times, what kind of extraordinary measures can be taken? I think all of those things are kind of on the agenda for next year. Are we good at this point? I know you hate to get to the minutes.
No, I mean, I'm just saying, we are in the middle of a pandemic. So if we're ever going to look at how you address it, I mean, I realize we've always done it every 3 years. I mean, we couldn't look at it now.
It's kind of like our rules and procedures. It takes thought, it takes a working group. Actually, it's a little hindsight here might be good in terms of reviewing it. I got 2 more hands. I got 3 more hands. Libby, Julie, and then Andy.
Yeah, I would just say that we have a path before us tonight that is a combination of fund balance for some non-recurring items and some of this federal money that's coming in, and that still will potentially meet all of those additional requests that have been added. So I think we need to look at the fact that we have a possible path here to a balanced budget, and not sort of harp on something that isn't an issue, because I think those are issues. Certainly the financial policy certainly needs to be readdressed, but that is such an important document to the credit rating agencies that regardless of whether we like or don't like the policy, our adherence to those policies is closely scrutinized by the credit rating agencies, and it's important. So I would just say, I think that the takeaway here is that we've found a lot of different solutions to get us to a balanced budget that are not all putting all our eggs in any one basket, and they don't solve the problems of potential future structural deficits if in fact, because we're using one-time money to solve this problem, but at least we don't feel like we're, trying to run a sprint to town meeting to all of a sudden, contemplate an override. And I think that may be part of a longer term financial discussion. And so I guess that's just all I would like to add.
Julie.
I just want to add one other thing. I know I sound like I'm talking out both sides of my mouth, because I see both sides of the idea of getting across the finish line this year. But I just also want to say that I am concerned about the addition of 36 new employees. And if we do that, then, it's the recurring amount of money that we have to deal with starting next year. And so we start out in the hole by a lot of money, so.
And Andy.
Bob, I think one of the documents you distributed, I think, was the Mass Department of Revenue informational guideline release on free cash.
Yes.
I haven't had a chance to read it thoroughly, but in just scanning it, I see it talks about adjusted free cash, where a community is allowed to have their free cash updated one time during any year to provide additional available funds to support appropriations. And then it says it seems to suggest, again, I apologize for not having read it thoroughly, that it seems to suggest that you have to do something by the end of March, Sue?
No, let me answer that if I can, Sue. The free cash has to be certified. And that's the 30 million of unrestricted fund balance that Sue went through the whole long accounting process before we got the fund balance memo to have those funds certified. So that's what that's talking about. You want to add anything, Sue? I'm trying to keep Snickers quiet.
No, he's quiet. I didn't read that, Andy, all through the whole thing, but certifying free cash takes about a 2-month process. And I've never been able to get an updated free cash number before town meeting.
We wouldn't need it.
No, we don't.
The amounts of money we're talking about are well within the certified free cash.
Exactly.
Also known as available funds, also known as fund balance.
Yes.
Okay, are we all set? Can we proceed to the minutes? From 3-4, they've been distributed. I know various people have provided comments.
3-2, right, Ben?
Is it? Wait a minute. Yes, I'm sorry. I was looking. I got my agenda for Thursday night in front of me because I wanted to look at something on there. Yeah, it's the minutes of 3-2. Thank you, Victor. If there are no comments or suggested revisions, George, was there something you wanted to say?
No, I was just going to say everybody has the red line version, and I have not received any additional comments since I put it out midday today. So,
Is there a motion to accept the minutes?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
George?
aye.
Libby?
Aye.
Nancy?
Aye.
Brenda?
Aye.
Tina?
Aye.
Andy?
Aye.
Dave?
Aye.
Victor?
Aye.
Kristen?
Snickers, aye.
Evan?
That's not Snickers.
Aye.
I was muted.
That was Rufus.
Alan?
Aye.
Daveline?
Aye.
Julie?
Aye.
Aaron?
Aye.
I think it's, what do you know? Okay, warrant articles updates. Well, we've got we've got about 8 articles on for Thursday night. The HMLP will not be heard on Thursday because the selectmen aren't going to vote that until next Tuesday. And there is some additional information that Paul Hino is going to provide. After talking with Erin, we thought it probably made most sense to defer this in view of a very full agenda for Thursday to a week for Thursday. We got the 2 climate action articles coming up. I think the selectmen are going to vote on Rockwood Road. You have something to add on that, Kristen?
So they did tonight vote no action on that, and we're going to circle back with Tim White to see if he wanted to withdraw it. for concerns of too many open questions that might come up at town meeting.
All right.
So just wanted to share that.
So do you know whether we'll hear from Tim before Thursday night?
So I'll follow up with Emily tomorrow to see if she was reaching out to Tim, and when we'd know that. If not, I can present the article as is on Thursday. I don't know how we proceed with selectmen voting no action.
Kristen, which article is that?
The 32 Rockwood Road.
Okay.
It's Article AA.
Okay.
And I understand that the planning board has withdrawn CCC.
Yes, that's right. So the recommended motion will all be, if that would have been in CCC, will be included in AAA.
Okay. All right.
So
Good.
can we just take it off?
Well, the substance is still being proposed by the planning board. It's just being done under one article rather than two.
Okay.
It'll go out of the WAS and it'll just be removed.
Wait, so I can confirm, just reconfirm it's CCC is the one that's withdrawn and that will be part of AAA?
Right.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
And are there developments on D, the accessory dwelling units one?
Andy, you want to take that?
Yes, the planning board is inclined to suggest that the matter be, that there be no action on the citizens petition, but the matter be referred to a study committee, and is in the process of reaching out to different people to get some ideas as to how that study committee should be constituted. And I don't know what the status, I saw an email that suggested that the citizen might be considering withdrawing the petition, but I don't know enough about that to say whether that's accurate or not. Have you heard
Okay.
anything, Victor?
No, I just saw the same email you did.
Yeah.
Nothing more.
So we should hear something from the planning board after it meets on this Monday as to their recommendation on D.
Okay, good. Well, we're, as Jim Taylor used to say, maybe we're approaching the top of Heartbreak Hill and ready to get on the way to Beacon Street. We're moving along. Thank you. I thank everybody for all the great work that's been done. I don't know if there's any other warrant articles update. I put the Mass Municipal Association presentation on as our next item on the federal legislation, but I'd suggest that may be moot, not mute, but moot, based on the report that Tom Mayo provided about Stephen Lynch. But if anybody who was on the Mass Municipal call that feels like there's something to add, go ahead. Not seeing anyone.
So Bob, I just wanted to I wanted to say that I think by the end of next week, we could put Article Q on the agenda for at least an initial discussion, which is the gender neutral.
Oh, okay. So
'Cause
next Thursday.
I suspect there'll be some discussion but I think I could have a draft comment recommendation ready by the end of next week or the following Tuesday.
So I'll put it on for a week from tonight. Okay.
2 weeks, right?
No, 2 weeks from either 2 weeks from tonight or a week from Thursday, whatever fits better with the schedule. The
Oh, I'm
end of
sorry.
next week.
I'm sorry. I'm operating on borrowed time. One of my granddaughters got me up at 5:30 this morning, so.
And I'm not being very clear, but
I'll put it on for a week from Thursday.
That would be good.
Okay,
Because I think that will probably require some discussion.
okay. Are there any liaison reports? Not seeing any. We are, of course, meeting Thursday night. It looks like we'll probably be meeting next Tuesday and next Thursday. I'll keep you abreast of anything that I'm seeing in terms of new information. Are there any matters not anticipated within 48 hours?
And Bob, can I just ask you one quick question? And if it's, maybe you've just done the best you can do, but I'll ask it anyhow. When you look in your crystal ball, do you have a rough idea of a budget vote date? I'm still just trying to work backwards in terms of ACES meetings and such. And I know that it's so fluid. So I won't hold you to it, but I got a pencil out instead of a pen in case you have any thoughts.
Well, initially the information I got was that Tom Mayo thought that the Board of Selectmen might vote the budget the week of March 15th, but it might slide to the week of March 22nd. I'm suspecting that with all of these breaking developments that we're looking at a selectman vote the maybe Tuesday of the week of the 22nd, I think.
Yes,
And maybe we're looking at budget night as the Thursday of that week.
Okay.
And I did talk with Victor recently about the process that was followed last year. And hopefully, Dave, you'll be prepared to drive us through the various budgets. And I think we should review each of the budgets and the recommendations before finally coming to a determination on our vote on a budget. I know it's a methodical way to go through everything. I appreciated the method last year and in previous years. We will have our questions focused, I think, by that time in terms of what the selectmen have done. I think we're all aware of our various options and of the things that are in the pipeline. So the forecast tools and the tax tool remain helpful. But I think probably that Thursday night is when we're looking at a budget vote. That's my best guess. Let's hope it doesn't slide beyond that, because we're really running out of time for the warrant.
Bob, is Tom Mayo still coming to talk to us on Thursday about his budget recommendations?
Yes, he is.
Okay, thanks.
And he wants to be present for the public safety facility discussion as well.
Okay.
And we can get a better idea from him tomorrow, Julie, when we have our weekly call as to what he's looking at for a schedule.
So Thursday, March 25 is the potential date for our budget discussion.
I think that's right. I think that's my best estimate at this point.
Thank you.
Bob, can I just ask you or Dave? So Dave, are you thinking then that your ACES recommendation to AdCom would maybe be the week before that? Like, just so we can kind of get a sense of timing? With a pencil, not a pen?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think the only thing I can probably say with confidence is coming out of that, I think we probably have an ACES meeting a week from tomorrow. And the thinking being hopefully that we get some more information and maybe a little more clarity on some of these moving parts. You know, I wouldn't certainly anticipate putting, I'll talk to Bob a little bit about the agenda, but I certainly think the agenda for that meeting on the 17th would involve at a minimum a discussion of a recommended budget, if not, maybe it's a possible vote or language to that effect. I mean, we're obviously, I'm sensitive to your point, Libby. We need to come up with that. But I mean, you know, for better or for worse, at least on a Zoom basis, we could reconvene as ACEs, you know, with appropriate notice again after the 17th if need be.
Okay. Yeah, I just didn't know if that was something that, I mean, obviously for sure, we'd need to have that before our meeting on the 25th, but I didn't know, I kind of forget how it worked in the past. If you guys had already tried to do that before, like in this case, if the selectmen vote on 323, would you guys have hoped to meet before then? But obviously you'll keep us posted. I know it's an unusual year, so just curious.
Well, I mean, you're asking a really important question, which is something I've been thinking about too, which is, you know, the question being, if ACES has a vote on the 17th, just to pick a date that recommends a number, and if the BOS, I mean, obviously the BOS isn't bound by ACES recommendation. So, you know, there's a potential that there's a difference there, and how do we reconcile something like that? So, yeah, a lot of open questions, I suppose.
All right.
Okay, anything else for tonight? If not, I accept a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
A second.
Second.
George,
Aye.
Libby,
Aye.
Nancy,
Aye.
Brenda,
Aye.
Tina,
Aye.
Andy,
Aye.
Dave,
Aye.
Victor,
Aye.
Kristen,
Aye.
Evan,
Aye.
Alan,
Aye.
David Lane,
Aye.
Julie,
Aye.
Aaron,
Aye.